I'm pleased to bring Amanda.
I wish I could sing after that, but I'll spare you. So I'm Amanda Stuermer, and I'm here tonight to talk a little bit about empowering women. And first of all, I want to make a little confession. I don't really empower women, and I don't really think any of us should. And before you start booing or get the hook to pull me off the stage, give me a moment to explain. I was born the fourth of 4 daughters, so I was basically born into a women's movement. And even though I was the youngest, I was definitely capable of being the leader, or so I thought. And here I am about age 5, fully empowered. We're in the red pleather cowgirl get-up. And this is about the time I think I decided I wanted to be an activist. And you can ask my sisters, who will gladly tell you that I was always ready to speak my mind and fight the good fight. Well, flash forward about 10 years. I'm 15, and I'm about to enter my freshman year at Neville High School. This was a pivotal moment in my evolution as an empowered woman. I had a choice to make. A choice that would have repercussions for the next 4 years of my life. I had to decide whether to be a cheerleader or a baton twirler. And you think I'm joking, but really, in my hometown of Monroe, Louisiana, football was everything. And football players were treated like Greek gods. And we held parties and pep rallies and even parades in their honor. And girls like me, we were given a choice. We could stand on the sidelines with a pair of pom-poms, or we could be part of the halftime show. And it was within that environment that I started to lose my sense of personal empowerment. I stopped seeing myself as a vehicle for change, and I started seeing myself as a hood ornament. I stopped using my voice to state my goals, and I started using my voice to cheer on field goals. But as much as I would like to blame somebody else for this loss of my personal power, the truth is I gave it away. Because you see, just as I believe the only person who can empower me is me, I also believe the only person who can disempower me is me. And I did an awesome job at disempowering myself. I will spare you all the details, but suffice it to say, by my second decade, there were very few traces of my red pleather-wearing activist self left. And that could have been the end of my story, and I certainly wouldn't be standing up here right now. But thankfully, life provided me with opportunities to cultivate 3 very important elements that helped me to rebuild my sense of empowerment. The first was very simply self-awareness. I started practicing yoga and going for hikes. I actually did Outward Bound right here in Central Oregon. And these mindfulness practices connected me back to myself. And what I realized or remembered was that I was pretty awesome. And once I realized how awesome I was, I started wanting to express it again. And so that's when I started cultivating self-expression. I finished college, and I went out and landed my dream job at Outside Magazine. I even got to work on that story right there with the Uber girl. And I was expressing myself all over the place. I felt awesome. I had an awesome job. I mean, what more did I need? I didn't think anything, really. But about the same time, I started moonlighting as a creative writing instructor at a juvenile detention center. And that's when I realized that I still needed to cultivate this really deep sense of self-worth that I'd been missing. And there's this quote that you probably have all heard from Howard Thurman. It's one of my favorites. It says, "Don't ask the world what you need to do. Ask yourself what makes you come alive and go and do that. Because what the world needs is more people who've come alive." Well, working with youth made me come alive. And I've spent the last 20 or so years trying to maintain that feeling. I've worked with nonprofits that serve women and girls in Louisiana, New Mexico, Oregon, Uganda. And then about 6 years ago, I decided it was time to launch my own. Because you see, I wanted to start offering women and girls the opportunity to cultivate those same tools that had helped me rebuild my sense of empowerment. Self-awareness, self-expression, and self-worth. So I started out here in Bend working in some middle and high schools. I probably worked with about 100 girls that first year. One of my very first students is in the front row, just happens to be. And I really loved working with the young girls. And so we started adding on programs. Last year, our programs reached over 3,000 women from Uganda all the way back here to Central Oregon. And I'd like to think that I've inspired some of these women and girls, but I don't think I've empowered any of them. You see, I don't really intend to empower anyone. And I think I did when I started out. I think I had full intentions of empowering women all over the world. But then I met a couple of women who changed the way I see empowerment. The first one was Esther, a woman I met in Uganda on my first trip. I was there on a women's service trip because I saw this as the next step in my work with women. I wanted to work with women around the world. So there I was, my first day as a global women's activist in Uganda, and I'm sitting next to Esther, who's one of the Choli women who's come to tell her story to our group. And over lunch, we introduce ourselves and we chat a little bit about our daughters. The common thread that we shared was motherhood. But after lunch, Esther stood up and started to tell her story. And that's when I realized just how drastically different that thread had been woven into our individual life tapestries. You see, Esther had been in northern Uganda when the LRA, the Lord's Resistance Army, came through. And I'm sure many of you have heard of the atrocities of Joseph Kony, but she lived them. She told of how he came to her village at night, and they burned down the houses. And she heard the screams of the girls as they were being dragged away, raped, beaten. And then she told what's hard for me to even retell. She told of how she had to watch as her son was forced to murder his father, her husband, with an axe. She never saw her son again after that night. But thankfully, she was able to escape with her daughter, and they fled to Kampala, where they lived in the slums with thousands of other displaced persons from her tribe. Now, Esther did not want her daughter to stay living in the slums. She wanted to provide a better life. So she took a job at the rock quarry, and it was backbreaking, degrading work, but she did it because it allowed her to pay her daughter's school fees. And her daughter was about to graduate from secondary school. And we sat there in silence, trying to absorb, probably as you are, drop by drop and word by word, the horror and the heartbreak and the hope that this courageous woman poured out through her stories. And as painful as it was to listen to, and as painful, obviously, as it is for me to even recount it, I can't imagine how painful it was to live her story. And I couldn't imagine having to survive her story. I wondered if I could. And that's when I realized how naive I had been to think that I could empower this woman. She had a strength and a resiliency that I could just barely begin to fathom. What she lacked were opportunities. And that's when I came back and started rethinking all of my thoughts about empowerment, and I met another woman, Grandma Rose. Grandma Rose is not my biological grandmother. She's a woman that my husband and I were fortunate enough to buy a farm from and fall in love with, and she became our adopted grandmother. She traveled the world for years and years. She was in her 90s and still traveling the world. She'd spent time in Uganda back in the 50s. And so I sat with her and told her about my experiences there and about my ideas around empowering women and how I was really questioning that whole concept. And she said she'd been watching women try to be empowered for so many years. They would try to be empowered by being like men. And they would try to be empowered by using their sexuality. She said she hoped that our generation would get it right and that we would realize that empowerment comes from within. It comes from being who we are and doing what we love and sharing that out in the world. And that's what I hear echoed with so many of the women and girls that we work with. And last year, at our inaugural women's conference, I was sitting in the front row with my 10-year-old daughter as the moderator of our teen panel asked one of the young women on our panel what she thought adults should know about her generation. And she stood there very confidently, all like 17 years of her, and faced a packed tower theater and said, "You should know we are capable." And I thought, wow. I mean, how might my life have been different if at 10 years old I'd had a role model like that? Or if as a teenager I'd had an opportunity like that to stand up fully in my power and be celebrated and supported by my community. Maybe I would have held on to my personal empowerment a little more tightly. So tonight, my invitation to all of us is to not think about how we can empower each other, but how can we inspire each other to empower ourselves? How can we help to provide each other with tools, like a bottle of water, so that we can start to, cultivate our self-expression? How can we offer each other opportunities, perhaps collaborations, different community opportunities where we can start to activate our empowerment? Because what we need, what our community needs, is for all of us, women, girls, men, boys, to come alive. Thank you very much.